Outside Cathedral Heights Tower, a black 9-year-old boy held out two
Excuse me, sir,
crumpled
can I
dollars
shine your shoes?
and asked if the man getting into the Bentley wanted a shine. Garrett Anderson, Billionaire CEO, didn't even turn his head.
Get your filthy hands off my car, boy. You people leave grease on everything. Bentley costs more than your whole block. Go beg somewhere else. Whoever raised you should be ashamed. Crawl back to the project you came from.
A woman lifted her phone to record. A man in a suit laughed out loud. The doorman looked at his shoes. 12 people on the sidewalk, and not one said a word. Garrett Anderson stepped into his Bentley. The boy leaned toward the open door and whispered one word. 3 syllables of breath, no louder than a prayer. Garrett Anderson's hand froze on the steering wheel. His face went white. In 4 minutes, every person laughing on this sidewalk would be begging that boy to take the word back. Yeah, I had to read that twice, too. I'm Kane Uncovers, and the stories I dig up are usually the ones somebody got paid to bury. And trust me, this one had a price tag the size of a city block. So pull up a chair. We've got 18 months to walk back through, and a wooden box you're really gonna want to keep your eyes on. To understand what just happened on that sidewalk, you have to understand 2 mornings that started in the same city, but in different worlds. Garrett Anderson woke at 5:30 in a penthouse on the 96th floor. His espresso machine cost $400, 3 encrypted phones charged on his dresser. He stood in front of a bathroom mirror lined with 12 framed press clippings, and he rehearsed his pitch. In 96 hours, his company's pediatric drug subsidiary, Meridian RX, would ring the opening bell. 3 institutional investors had soft-circled $1.2 billion. The Forbes cover above his sink called him the cleanest operator in private equity. He drank his espresso. He signed a single stock transfer form on a leather blotter. His chauffeur was out with appendicitis, so he would drive himself this morning. He took the keys to the midnight blue Bentley Flying Spur. He smiled at his reflection. He told himself, out loud, that today was the day $1 billion walked into a room. 12 miles south, above a laundromat in Mott Haven, a black 9-year-old boy named Brandon Williams woke at 4:50. He folded 36 newspapers in the dark on the kitchen floor. He pinched the rubber bands so they would not snap and wake his mother, who had come home at 3 from a 16-hour shift at Lenox Hill Hospital. He ate half an apple. He saved the other half in a paper bag for after school. He pulled on his father's work boots. The boots were 3 sizes too big. He stuffed the toes with newspaper so they would not slip. He pulled on the white shirt his mother ironed every Sunday. He tied a green canvas apron around his waist. The apron was hand-stitched in his father's small, careful letters. The letters spelled the words Williams and Son, Polish. His father had stitched them when Brandon was 6. His father had been dead for 18 months. Brandon picked up the wooden shoeshine box from beside the door. The box had a brass latch. The brass latch closed with a soft double click, the way his father had taught him to close it when he was 5. Click, click. Both thumbs. Always both thumbs. Because a man takes care of his tools, baby. A man takes care of his tools the way he takes care of his people. Brandon's mother came out of the bedroom in her scrubs. Her name was Yvonne. Her eyes were tired in the way that only grief and double shifts can make a face tired. She did not say don't go. She had stopped saying don't go 3 weeks ago, when Brandon had finally told her what his father told him the night before he died. She said only, "Baby, are you sure?" Brandon nodded. Yvonne said, "I'll be on the corner, half a block, the whole time. Don't look for me. I'll be there." Brandon nodded again. She kissed the top of his head. She held him for 2 seconds longer than usual. Then she let him go. When Brandon was 6 years old, his father used to sit on the edge of his bed and tell him stories. The stories were not princess stories. They were not dragon stories. They were quiet stories about 3 birds. His father would say, "Once there were 3 birds, baby. A heron, a kestrel, and a third bird whose name kept changing because it was hiding. And Brandon would ask, "Where was it hiding, Daddy?" And his father would smile in the dark. And his father would say, "In a place called Halcyon. Don't say it out loud, baby. It's just for the story." And Brandon, who was 6, would nod in his pillow and say, "I won't say it, Daddy." And he didn't. Not for years. Not when his father was fired 3 weeks before Brandon's 8th birthday. Not when his father drove home on the FDR at 2:14 in the morning and never made it. Not when the police told his mother it was a single-vehicle accident, and the HR file said performance termination, and the obituary in the local paper was 4 lines long and said nothing true. Not when a wooden box arrived at their apartment from his father's office, and Brandon discovered that the box had a false bottom, and inside the false bottom was a Dunkin' napkin folded 8 times in his father's handwriting. Brandon kept the napkin. He memorized the napkin. And on a Tuesday morning in October, with 36 papers folded and his mother half a block away, he walked to Cathedral Heights Tower and waited for the man on the Forbes cover to come downstairs. One man rehearsed an IPO. One little boy rehearsed his father's bedtime story. And only one of them knew how the story ended. The valet drive of Cathedral Heights Tower at 9 in the morning is not a place where a black 9-year-old is supposed to stand. The doorman knew this. His name was Henry Brown. He had watched Brandon shine shoes on this corner for 8 months. He liked the boy. He liked the careful way the boy folded a paper, the careful way the boy said sir and ma'am, the careful way the boy paid for a juice box at the bodega with quarters counted out on the counter. Henry Brown also knew the rule. Anderson's security chief had told him twice. The kid stays curbside. Always. Twice, Henry had quietly disobeyed. He had let Brandon stand a foot closer than the rule allowed. He told himself it was a small thing. He told himself nobody would notice. This morning, he would notice. Brandon's regular customers had already come and gone. A junior associate who tipped $3 and read the sports page over the boy's shoulder. A paralegal who tipped with a smile and once asked, half joking, "What are you reading, kiddo?" Brandon had answered, "My dad said footnotes are the truth, ma'am." She had laughed. Then she had stopped laughing. Then she had started bringing him photocopies of things on Wednesdays. Brandon never told the paralegal why he wanted the photocopies. The paralegal never asked. 6 blocks north, on a Saturday afternoon 14 months ago, Brandon had walked into the public library at 138th Street and asked the librarian behind the desk if the library had a way to look up business filings. The librarian's name was Eleanor Hayes. She was 62 years old. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. She had read the obituary of Daniel Williams in the local paper 18 months earlier, and she had remembered it because the obituary had been 4 lines long, and the dead man had been only 36 years old. And because she had once helped a tired-looking man named Daniel Williams find a citation for an SEC enforcement action in the year 2014. Eleanor Hayes did not ask the boy why a 9-year-old needed the SEC's Edgar filing system. She showed him how to use the free terminal. She showed him what a 10K was. She showed him what an S1 was. She showed him what a footnote 4 meant. She did not ask why. She had read the obituary. 3 weeks ago, when Meridian RX had filed its S1 prospectus, Eleanor had printed the entire document for Brandon without comment. He had sat at the children's section table for 2 days, working his way through 36 pages of legalese with a sharpened number 2 pencil in his hand and his father's bedtime story echoing in his head. On page 36, in footnote 4, he had found the phrase acquired receivables vehicle. He had whispered in the children's section of the public library, "Heron, Kestrel." Eleanor Hayes had heard. Eleanor Hayes had pretended she had not. The Dunkin' napkin was still in the wooden bottom. The false bottom had a small finger hole drilled into the corner so a child could lift it. Inside the false bottom, the napkin was folded 8 times. The pencil was smudged at the word Halcyon, because Brandon had read the napkin so many times the graphite had worn through. The napkin said, "If anything happens to me, the word is Halcyon." Tell a reporter. Don't tell a lawyer. Lawyers can be bought. Tell Maggie at the Atlantic Ledger. She owes me a favor. Brandon had walked into the lobby of the Atlantic Ledger 8 months ago, alone, in his father's boots. He had asked the receptionist, "Is there a reporter here named Maggie? My dad said she owes him." The receptionist had picked up a phone. A woman in a leather jacket had come downstairs. Her name was Margaret Moore, and her friends called her Maggie, and she had gone very still when she had seen the boy. She had bought him a hot chocolate. She had asked him 3 questions and had cried on the 4th. Every Wednesday after school for 8 months, Brandon had met Maggie Moore at a diner in Harlem. They had talked. He had brought her his father's notes. She had brought him her notebook. This Tuesday morning, Brandon stood on the corner of Cathedral Heights Tower in his father's boots, with his wooden box, with his green apron, with his mother half a block behind him, and he did the bravest thing he had ever done. He shifted the box 6 inches closer to the valet line. The block did not yet know. But the block was about to tilt. At 9:11 in the morning, Garrett Anderson came out of the lobby alone. His chauffeur was at the hospital. His security detail was parking a second car. For 3 minutes, the richest man on the block was unguarded on his own sidewalk. He had calculated this exposure as acceptable. He had been wrong. He saw the boy on the curb. He registered the boots 3 sizes too big, the white shirt, the wooden box, the green apron, the dark skin, the careful eyes. He registered all of it the way a man registers a stain on his sleeve. He intended to walk past. The boy stood up. The boy held out 2 crumpled dollars. The boy said, "Sir, would you like a shine? It's $3. I'll owe you the dollar back." What happened next is what the woman with the phone recorded, what the man in the suit laughed at, what the doorman could not look at. Garrett Anderson said the 3 sentences: "Filthy hands, you people, the project you came from." 12 adults stood within 10 feet of a 9-year-old child being humiliated. Not one of them spoke. Brandon did not cry. He did not run. He knelt down. He opened the brass latch with both thumbs. Click, click. He took out a soft cloth and a tin of black wax. He looked up at Garrett Anderson, calm as a 4th grader answering a question in class, and he said, "Page 36, sir." Garrett Anderson's hand stopped on the door of the Bentley. Brandon said, "Footnote 4. The words are acquired receivables vehicle." Garrett Anderson did not move. Brandon kept talking, slow and even, and he started polishing the calfskin shoe in front of him with 2 careful strokes per side, the way his father had taught him. "My dad said there are 3 birds, sir. He said one is a heron, one is a kestrel. He said the 3rd bird used to have a name, and then someone got scared and they renamed it. Twice. In 2022. Brandon switched to the left shoe. "My dad said when grown-ups rename things twice, it means they know they're going to get caught." Garrett Anderson's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked for the first time at the boy's face. He saw the green apron. He saw the small, careful stitching. Williams & Son, Polish. He read the word twice. Williams. His face went very still. Brandon tightened the laces on the second shoe. He stood up. He fastened the brass latch. Click, click, both thumbs. The way a man takes care of his tools. He stepped a half-pace closer. The doorman flinched but did not move. The woman with the phone kept recording, but her hand had begun to shake. Brandon leaned up toward Garrett Anderson's ear. He did not touch him. He whispered the word his father had told him never to say. Halcyon. 3 syllables of breath, no louder than a prayer. Garrett Anderson's hand froze on the steering wheel. His knuckles went white. His face went white. He did not turn his head. He did not breathe. For 4 full seconds, the richest man in this zip code forgot how to leave his own car. The woman with the phone stopped recording. She did not press stop. Her thumb just slid off the screen. The man in the suit stopped laughing. The doorman, Henry Brown, took 1 step away from his post and did not go back. Brandon sat down on his wooden box. He folded his hands in his lap. He waited. Garrett Anderson pulled his foot out of the Bentley. He stepped back onto the sidewalk. He turned and looked at the boy. He said, very quietly, in a voice that was not the voice of 3 minutes ago, "Who told you those things, son?" Brandon did not look up. Brandon said, "My dad. When I was little, he thought I wasn't listening." A black town car pulled up behind the Bentley. 2 men in suits got out. Anderson's security. They saw their boss standing on the sidewalk. They saw the child in front of him. They started walking forward. Anderson held up one hand without turning. The men stopped. The Bentley was still idling at the curb. The driver's door was still open. The IPO meeting was now 5 minutes away on the 18th floor. 3 institutional investors were sitting in a conference room on the 18th floor, with $1.2 billion between them. None of them knew that their morning had already ended. Brandon picked up his crumpled $2. He held them out again. He said, "I still owe you the dollar back, sir. The shine was 3. You only paid 2. Garrett Anderson stared at the boy for a long moment. Then, on a sidewalk where 4 minutes ago he had told a child to crawl back to the project he came from, Garrett Anderson reached into his wallet and took out a $1 bill, and he put it in the boy's small, open palm. His own hand was shaking. The block had stopped pretending, but the block did not yet know whose son this child was. No, I gotta stop you right there. Did you catch what just happened? That kid asked for $1 back. $1. After that man had literally just spit on his whole bloodline 2 minutes earlier. And the kid just stood there, palm open, polite as Sunday morning, asking for change. That's not bravery. Bravery is loud. This is something colder. This is a kid who's been rehearsing a debt for 18 months, and the dollar's just the first installment. Honestly, this part broke me a little. Garrett Anderson asked the question very softly, the way a man asks a question when he is already afraid of the answer. "What is your name, son?" Brandon Williams looked up from the wooden box. He looked Garrett Anderson directly in the eye, for the first time. He said the words slowly, the way his mother had taught him to say his own name to a stranger, the way his father had taught him to stand up straight when he gave it. "Williams, sir. Brandon. Daniel Williams was my dad." The word was hung in the air for 3 full seconds. The Bentley idled. The 2 security men stood frozen 10 feet away. The woman with the phone had lowered her hand to her side. The doorman, Henry Brown, had taken off his cap and was holding it in both hands. Garrett Anderson said, "Your father was not well, son." Brandon said, "My dad drove with both hands on the wheel, sir. He didn't crash cars." Garrett Anderson opened his mouth. He closed it. Brandon's voice did not rise. He did not blink. He spoke the way a child speaks when the child has been waiting 18 months to say a single sentence in a single place to a single man. "My dad worked on the 18th floor. He had a desk by the window. He told me about the file cabinet with the gold key. He told me you were going to fire him before he could file the 8K. He told me, sir, before any of it happened." Garrett Anderson's face had gone the color of paper. A black sedan pulled up behind the Bentley. The car was small, dented, blue, not black, not security, not Anderson's. The driver's door opened and a woman in a leather jacket got out. She had a leather notebook in one hand and a small recorder in the other. The light on the recorder was already on. Her name was Margaret Moore. Her friends called her Maggie. She had been waiting for this Tuesday for 8 months. Maggie did not walk to Anderson. Maggie walked to Brandon. She knelt down on the sidewalk so her eyes were level with the 9-year-old's, and she said, in the voice of a friend, not a reporter, "Hi, kiddo. You good?" Brandon nodded. Maggie stood up. She turned to Garrett Anderson. The recorder was still on. She said, in a voice perfectly calm and perfectly clear, "Mr. Anderson, would you like to comment on a structured receivables vehicle named Halcyon? currently disclosed as a performing asset on page 36, footnote 4 of the Meridian RX S1 prospectus? Garrett Anderson looked at the reporter. He looked at the boy. He looked at the Bentley. He understood, in the time it takes a man to draw one breath, that the boy on the curb had not just walked up to him. The boy on the curb had been preparing for him for 18 months, with a librarian, with a reporter, with a mother who knew, with his father's careful sentences memorized one by one in the dark of a bedroom in Mott Haven. Garrett Anderson said very quietly, "I think I should make a phone call." He did not move. The little boy had not raised his voice once. But the Empire had just heard its own name. Garrett Anderson tried to recover. Garrett Anderson had been recovering from worse rooms than this for 30 years. Garrett Anderson smiled the way men smile when they intend to spend their way out of a problem. "Brandon, son, let's talk about this inside. My private office, 12th floor, quiet room. We can sort this out, productively. I think your mother might appreciate that." Brandon did not look up from his wooden box. Brandon said, "No, sir. My mom said never go inside a building with someone who lied about my dad." 12 people on the sidewalk heard a 9-year-old quote his mother to a billionaire, and the woman who had been recording on her phone made a small sound that was almost a sob. The line landed because everyone there understood, for the first time, that the child was not improvising. The child was carrying a rule. The rule had been given to him by a woman who was not yet on the sidewalk, but was about to be. Maggie Moore lifted her recorder a little higher. Garrett Anderson tried again. Smaller, softer. The voice he used in courtrooms. "This child has clearly suffered a tragedy. We're happy to support the family with a generous—" Brandon, quietly, to Maggie, in the cadence of a 4th grader giving a book report. "Ms. Moore, page 36, footnote 4, 3 birds. The 3rd one was renamed in 2022. My dad's notes are in the bank. My mom has the key." Maggie wrote it down. She underlined the words bank and key twice. The chief of staff appeared at the lobby door. He saw the Bentley still idling. He saw the boy on the curb. He saw the reporter. He saw his boss, frozen on a Tuesday morning at 9:18, and he mouthed a single 4-letter word, and he did not come outside. Down the sidewalk, half a block south, a woman in scrubs began to walk toward them. She did not run. She walked the way a mother walks when she has been waiting to walk this distance for 18 months. She walked the way a woman walks when she has already cried every tear she is going to cry today, and now there is only the walking left. Yvonne Williams stopped beside her son. She knelt down on the sidewalk so her arm could go around his shoulders. She did not look at Garrett Anderson at all. She looked only at her son. She said one word, "Baby." Brandon leaned into her chest. He did not cry. 8 months of held tears did not fall. He had saved them. He had saved them for somewhere better than this sidewalk, in front of these laughing strangers, with this man's Bentley still idling at the curb. Yvonne kissed the top of his head, and she said, into his ear, just loud enough for the recorder to catch, "I'm proud of you, baby. Daddy is proud of you." Garrett Anderson looked away. He did not have permission to look at this. Nobody had given him permission to look at this. Behind the Williamses, the doorman Henry Brown took 3 steps to his right and stood beside them with his hands behind his back. He was 60 years old. He had worn this uniform for 14 years. He had never broken a single rule of his post until this morning. He looked straight ahead. He had chosen a side. A minute later, Wallace Taylor, the second shift security guard who was supposed to have gone home an hour ago, crossed from the staff entrance and stood on the other side of the family. His radio was clipped to his belt. His radio was off. 2 uniformed black men, a mother in scrubs, a 9-year-old in his father's boots, a wooden shoeshine box. On the sidewalk of a $4.6 billion tower, in front of a midnight blue Bentley, while a billionaire stood 3 feet away with his mouth half open. The image, in language only, should be allowed to breathe. Brandon turned to Garrett Anderson. The boy's voice when he spoke was not angry. It was the voice of a child who had practiced this sentence in the mirror. Sir, you have 12 minutes until your investors come downstairs. You can ring the bell on Friday, or you can ring my mom's lawyer first. My dad said you can't do both. Garrett Anderson realized something at that moment that he would later, in a federal facility, describe to a court-appointed psychologist as the moment his life ended. He realized that the boy had said, "My dad said," 4 times in 11 minutes, and every single time the boy had been correct. His chief of staff finally came outside. The chief of staff was sweating through his collar. The chief of staff said very low, "Garrett, we need to take this inside. Now." Yvonne stood up. She did not look at Anderson. She looked at Maggie Moore. She said, "Ms. Moore, we have a copy of the napkin. We have a copy of the deposit box receipt. We can give them to you now, or we can give them to Helena Brooks at the SEC at 11:30 this morning. The choice is Mr. Anderson's. It is not ours." Maggie Moore wrote down Helena Brooks and 11:30 in her notebook. She did not need to ask who Helena Brooks was. She had already called Helena Brooks twice this week. Garrett Anderson had not heard the name Helena Brooks in 22 months. The last time he had heard the name, his general counsel had used it in a sentence that ended with the words, "and we should make sure she never gets the file." Helena Brooks was the senior counsel for the Southern District of New York. She was the woman who decided whether to open an investigation. She was the woman who decided whether to dial a federal magistrate for a subpoena. She was, at this moment, sitting at her desk 17 blocks south, with a cup of coffee and her phone face up, waiting for a call she had been told to expect. Garrett Anderson felt something he had not felt in 30 years. He felt afraid. Maggie Moore knelt down again, just for a second, and she said something to Brandon so quietly that only the recorder caught it. She said, "Your dad said you'd come find me. I just didn't know which Tuesday." Brandon's chin trembled for the first time all morning, but still he did not cry. He said only, "He told me you were nice, Ms. Moore." Maggie smiled at him the way a person smiles when she has owed a debt for 2 years and is finally allowed to pay it. A third car pulled to the curb, a small white sedan. The driver did not get out. The driver simply rolled down the passenger window and lifted a small camera. The lens was long and serious. The driver was a photographer from the Atlantic Ledger. Maggie had texted her the address at 6:45 this morning. 2 new sets of footsteps approached from inside the lobby. A revolving door turned. 2 men and a woman in suits stepped out. They stopped on the top step. They had come downstairs because their 9:30 meeting had not started, and Garrett Anderson had not answered his phone, and $1.2 billion does not sit politely in a conference room past its own start time. They had come downstairs to find their host. They had not expected to find him on the sidewalk. They had not expected to find a black 9-year-old. They had not expected to find a reporter. They took the scene in. They took it in slowly. The Bentley, the mother in scrubs, the 2 uniformed men, the recorder, the boy. Behind them, in the revolving door, the chief of staff said, again, louder, "Garrett, now!" Garrett Anderson looked at the lobby. He looked at the Bentley. He looked at the Williamses. He looked at the 2 uniformed men flanking them. He looked at the reporter. He looked at the recorder, still red, still on. He understood that he had 12 minutes. He understood that there was no version of these 12 minutes in which he won. But he did not yet understand that the boy was going to give him a choice anyway. The 3 investors on the top step had names. They had names that mattered in this city. In rooms where $1.2 billion decides what hospital chain gets bought next, and what zip codes get rezoned, and which compliance officer gets quietly pushed out before he can file an 8K. The man in the gray suit was Spencer Davis, managing partner of Davis Moore Capital. The woman with the red folio was Lillian Taylor, chief investment officer of Taylor Holdings. The man with the pension fund credential clipped to his lapel was Roland Anderson, no relation. He had heard every Garrett Anderson joke and had stopped laughing at them 10 years ago. Spencer Davis spoke first. His voice was loud, careful, casual. He had the voice of a man who had decided to pretend that nothing was wrong until somebody made him stop pretending. "Garrett, there you are. We've been waiting upstairs. Is this a photo op?" Garrett Anderson tried to smile. His smile did not work the way it usually worked. He said, in a voice that was almost steady, "Spencer, this young man and I are talking about a community scholarship program we've been planning to announce. Brandon, would you come over here and—" Brandon Williams did not look at Garrett Anderson. Brandon looked at Spencer Davis. He looked the way a fourth grader looks when he is reciting a fact for a teacher. He said, "Sir, I'm not a scholarship program. I'm Daniel Williams's son. My dad worked on the 18th floor for 9 years. He told me about the 3 birds before he died." Spencer Davis stopped smiling. Lillian Taylor opened her phone. She was already pulling up the S1 prospectus. Garrett Anderson said, very quickly, "Spencer, this is clearly a confused child whose mother is—" Maggie Moore stepped forward. Half a step. Just enough that her body was now between Brandon and the 3 investors. Not in front of him. Beside him. Maggie spoke directly to Lillian Taylor. Her recorder was still on. "Ms. Taylor, your fund's 2024 Compliance White Paper, page 8, prohibits investment in any vehicle with undisclosed offshore liability transfers. We have credible reason to believe the Meridian RX S1, page 36, footnote 4, conceals exactly that. We can show you the source documents in 20 minutes, off the record if you prefer. On the record if you prefer that." Lillian Taylor looked at the page on her phone. She scrolled. She read. Her face did not move, but the hand holding the phone went very still. She lifted her eyes from the screen. She looked at Garrett Anderson. She said, in a voice that was very, very quiet, "Garrett." Roland Anderson, no relation, took a single step backward, away from his namesake, the way a man steps back from a small fire that is about to become a large fire. Spencer Davis cleared his throat. He looked at Lillian Taylor. He looked at the boy. He looked at the recorder. He said, "I think we should reconvene this afternoon. Or perhaps not." Brandon, almost too softly to hear, said, "My dad said don't go inside." He was talking to himself, but everyone heard. The chief of staff said, "We need to take this inside, all of us, now." Nobody moved toward the door. Lillian Taylor turned to her assistant, who had appeared at her elbow with a phone already dialing. She said, "Cancel, all of it, today." Spencer Davis looked at his own phone. He typed 3 words to his compliance team. The 3 words were, "Pause Meridian RX allocation." It was 9:31 in the morning. The Bentley was still idling at the curb. The Williamses were still standing on the sidewalk. The recorder was still red. And the IPO, that was supposed to ring the opening bell on Friday morning, had just functionally died on a Tuesday at 9:31, on a sidewalk, in front of a 9-year-old boy who had not raised his voice once. Nobody had announced it yet, but the 18th floor conference room was now the most expensive empty room in Manhattan. Garrett Anderson understood, finally, that he had no card left to play. He had only one choice. The boy was about to offer it to him. "Let me ask you something before we keep going. If you're Brandon, 9 years old, dad in the ground, and a billionaire on his knees in front of you, do you take the trust fund and walk away? Mom never works another double shift. College paid. Done. Or do you go for the throat? Because I gotta tell you, sitting here writing this, I don't know which one I'd pick. And the part that messes me up is, Brandon picked something I didn't even know was on the menu. Watch what he does next." Garrett Anderson asked for 2 minutes alone with Brandon. Yvonne Williams said, "No." She did not say it loudly. She said it the way a mother says no to a stranger reaching for her child in a grocery store. which is to say, she said it without leaving any room for a second sentence. Brandon looked up at her. He took her hand. He said, "Mom, it's okay. Stay right here. 3 steps, so you hear." Yvonne hesitated. Her eyes searched his face. Then she nodded once. She took 2 steps back. She did not take 3. Maggie Moore took 4. The recorder was still on. Maggie had positioned the recorder so that the small black microphone was pointed at Garrett Anderson's mouth. Garrett Anderson knelt down on the sidewalk. The richest man on the block knelt down on a piece of dirty Manhattan concrete in his $1,800 shoes, and he leveled his face with the face of a 9-year-old, and he tried, in a voice that no longer belonged to a billionaire, to make this go away. "Brandon, listen to me, son. Whatever you think happened to your father, I am sorry. Truly. Let me make this right. A trust, college, graduate school. Your mother set for life. Today, right now, we can wire it before lunch." Brandon looked at him. Brandon's voice did not shake. Brandon said, "My dad is dead, sir. You can't make that right. You can only stop pretending." 9 words. A 9-year-old. The woman with the phone 3 feet away whispered, "Oh my God." She did not lift her phone. She had not lifted it since the boy had said the word halcyon. Some moments, even her generation knew, were not for filming. Some moments were for standing very still and being a witness. Garrett Anderson tried again. This time the kindness left his voice. This time, the man who had built a $4.6 billion empire by making problems disappear came back into the room. "Son, if you push this, my lawyers will bury your mother in motions for a decade. They will say things about your father that, believe me, you do not want said. There is a smarter version of today. Take the trust. Walk away. Be a child." Brandon looked at him. Brandon's voice was steady. He said, "My mom already heard everything they could say, sir. They said it 18 months ago. We are still here." Garrett Anderson exhaled. He was a man who had calculated the price of every silence he had ever bought. He had never met a silence he could not buy. He had just met one. Brandon said, "There is a smarter version, sir. The smart version is you walk into the lobby and you call Miss Brooks at the SEC yourself. Today, before lunch, you tell her you want to come in. You tell her about Halcyon." Garrett Anderson said, "Why?" Brandon said, "Because if my mom delivers the file at 11:30, sir, the news writes itself one way. If you call first, it writes the other way." He paused. He added, very quietly, "And because my dad would have called first, sir. He believed in doing things the right way, even with you." 3 feet away, Yvonne Williams put her hand to her mouth. Maggie Moore wrote in her notebook just one line, and she underlined it 3 times. The boy gave him a chance because his father would have. Then Brandon, who was 9, who had been waiting for this Tuesday for 18 months, let the technical part of the conversation pass to the adults beside him. He had carried the truth this far. He did not have to carry the law. Maggie Moore lifted her recorder a fraction of an inch. She said into it, evenly, professionally, "Halcyon is the internal code name for a structured receivables vehicle that routes pediatric trial liability through 3 Cayman entities, Heron, Kestrel, and a third entity renamed twice in 2022. The S1 lists the receivables as performing assets. They are not. They are guarantees against pediatric trial outcomes Anderson Whitfield knew were going to settle." Daniel Williams flagged this in a compliance memo dated March 14, 2024. He was terminated 3 weeks later for performance. He died on the FDR drive at 2:14 in the morning, before he could file the 8K. Yvonne Williams spoke for only the second time on this sidewalk. Her voice was flat. It was a voice that had been folded very small for 18 months. She said, "The 8K is in his handwriting. It is in our safe deposit box. The bank is Citibank, Mott Haven branch. The key is in my pocket." Brandon looked up at Garrett Anderson. The boy's eyes were dry. They had been dry for 18 months. He said, "It goes to Miss Brooks at 11:30, sir, unless you call her first." Garrett Anderson stayed kneeling on the sidewalk for a long, long moment. He looked at the boy. He looked at the mother. He looked at the reporter. He looked at his own hand, which was, by now, unmistakably shaking. He looked at the Bentley, still idling, the door still open 8 inches. He stood up slowly. He said, "I think I should go inside and make a call." He turned. He walked, slowly, past the chief of staff, past the 3 investors, past the photographer in the white sedan, past the doorman holding his cap in both hands. He walked through the revolving door of his own tower. He went up to the 18th floor. He sat at the desk that had once belonged to him, the desk he had taken when Daniel Williams had been escorted out of this building 22 months earlier. He put on his reading glasses. He picked up his desk phone. At 9:48 in the morning, Garrett Anderson dialed the Southern District of New York and asked for Helena Brooks. When she answered, he said the word himself. He said, "Halcyon." The call was logged. The call was time-stamped. The call was the foundation of every charge that would, in the end, be filed against him. At 11:14 in the morning, federal investigators arrived at Cathedral Heights Tower with a subpoena for the 18th floor file room. At 11:42 in the morning, Maggie Moore filed her first piece. The headline read, "He drove with both hands on the wheel, the compliance officer, his son, and the word the Bentley never wanted to hear." The Meridian RX IPO did not ring the bell on Friday. By Friday close of business, the publicly listed parent company, Anderson Whitfield Holdings, had lost $2.4 billion in market capitalization. A 9-year-old boy on a sidewalk had said one word. The empire had heard it. And the empire was already coming apart. But the boy was not done. Because mercy is one thing. Repair is another. 3 weeks later, on a Wednesday afternoon, the Southern District of New York filed a 6-count indictment against Garrett Anderson. Securities fraud, wire fraud, obstruction, witness retaliation. 2 counts that, in the legal language used by Helena Brooks at the press conference, related to the death of a former employee under conditions warranting reopening. Anderson eventually pleaded to 3 of the 6 counts. He served 36 months at a federal facility in Pennsylvania. The Bentley was sold at auction to a collector who never knew the story. Anderson Whitfield Holdings was broken into 3 smaller firms. Meridian RX was acquired by a competitor and restructured under a court-appointed monitor. The pediatric trial liabilities, no longer hidden, were paid out to the families they had been hidden from. The total was $86 million. The first check went to a family in Cleveland whose 6-year-old daughter had been part of the trial. They used the money to keep their house. Daniel Williams's name was reinstated on the witness registry of the Southern District of New York. The official cause of his death was reopened. Investigators found 2 things that had not been entered into the original police report. They found tire tread inconsistencies. They found a sedan that had pulled in behind him on the FDR Drive at 2:13 in the morning and pulled off at 2:15. 2 former Anderson Whitfield contractors took plea deals. The HR file was corrected. Performance termination was struck through and replaced with protected whistleblower disclosure. The strike-through was made by Helena Brooks herself in red pen, and a copy was mailed to Yvonne Williams's apartment with a single handwritten line at the bottom of the page. "I am sorry it took us 18 months. HB." Yvonne Williams received the back wages her husband had been owed. She used the first check to buy Brandon a pair of boots that fit. He kept his father's old boots in the closet anyway. He told his mother that the new ones were for school and the old ones were for Saturdays. 6 weeks after the Tuesday on the sidewalk, Helena Brooks invited Brandon Williams to the Southern District of New York. Not as a witness. He had already been deposed twice with his mother and Maggie Moore present. Helena Brooks invited him as a guest. She showed him the forensic accounting unit. She showed him the cubicle where the financial crimes paralegals worked. She showed him a small office at the end of the hall with no nameplate on the door. She knelt down on the carpet so her eyes were level with his. She said, "Brandon, in 18 years on this job, I have never met a child who could carry his father's careful sentences this carefully. You did not learn that from the library alone. You learned that from a man who loved you and who taught you very, very well." Brandon nodded. Helena Brooks said, "I cannot offer you a job. You are 9. The law is, annoyingly, clear about that." She smiled. She said, "But I can offer you a promise. When you turn 14, this office will offer you a paid summer mentorship in the forensic accounting unit. The offer is contingent on 2 things. 1, that you stay in school. 2, that you, yourself, decide you want it. If you decide you want to be a chef or a teacher or anything else in the world, this office will write you any letter of recommendation you ever need, for the rest of your life." She handed Yvonne Williams a sealed envelope. The envelope was on Southern District of New York letterhead. The envelope contained a 1-page letter, signed in blue ink by Helena Brooks herself. Brandon nodded once. He kept his face very still. His mother held his hand. In the elevator on the way down, he cried for 19 floors. Yvonne did not say, "Don't cry, baby." She said, "Go ahead, baby," and she held him. 3 months later, an anonymous donor, not Anderson, never Anderson, established a scholarship at City College of New York. The scholarship was for first-generation students entering accounting and compliance. The scholarship was named the Daniel Williams Memorial Fellowship. Eleanor Hayes, the librarian from the 138th Street branch, was asked to serve on the selection committee. At the announcement ceremony, when a reporter asked her why she had agreed, Eleanor Hayes answered with a single sentence. She said, "A boy walked into my branch 14 months ago and asked for a 10K. I owed his father the rest of the answer." Henry Brown, the doorman who had taken 3 steps to his right and stood beside the Williamses on the sidewalk, was offered a security director role at the new firm running Meridian RX under court-monitored restructuring. He took the job. His first hire was Wallace Taylor. Maggie Moore won a regional journalism award the following spring. In her acceptance speech, she said only one sentence about the story. She said, "The story was already written. A 9-year-old just read it out loud." Brandon Williams went back to 4th grade. He still shines shoes some Saturdays. Not for money, for the rhythm. He says it helps him think. He still asks his customers sometimes, "Sir, is that a Class A share or a Class B?" The customers who know laugh. The customers who do not know look it up later. Some of them tip extra. His mother sleeps a full night for the first time in 18 months. On a Saturday afternoon in March, Brandon sat alone at the kitchen table in the apartment above the laundromat. He opened the wooden shoe shine box. He fastened the latch with both thumbs and then unfastened it again, the way his father had taught him, just to feel it. Click, click. Both thumbs, both times. He lifted the false bottom. The Duncan napkin was no longer there. The napkin was now, legally, in evidence in the Southern District of New York, marked Exhibit C. Brandon took out a fresh sheet of lined paper. He took a yellow No. 2 pencil from his school bag. He sat at the kitchen table with the late afternoon sun coming through the laundromat sign onto his small hands, and he wrote, in the slanted-down handwriting of a 9-year-old who still has not quite learned to write in straight lines. "Dad." They read it, all of it, out loud. "Mom was in the front row. I wore your boots. I didn't cry, except in the elevator. Love, Brandon." He folded the paper 4 times. He placed it under the false bottom. He closed the box. Click, click, both thumbs. He went to find his mother. Outside Cathedral Heights Tower, on a sidewalk on a Tuesday morning in October, a billionaire stepped into a Bentley and called a black 9-year-old boy a list of things that 12 adults were too afraid to push back against. 4 minutes later, that same Bentley sat empty at the curb. The man who had called the boy filthy was on the 18th floor, on his own desk phone, dialing the Southern District of New York. The reporter was filing. The mother was holding her son. The doorman had taken off his cap. The block had stopped pretending. The boy did not bring a weapon to that sidewalk. He brought a wooden box, a green apron, his father's bedtime story about 3 birds, 18 months of careful preparation, and a single word he had been told never to say. Sometimes, the smallest people on the curb are doing the quietest, most patient work in the country. Sometimes, they are doing it in their father's boots. Sometimes, they have been doing it for years before anyone notices. And sometimes, on a Tuesday morning in October, the work moves a building. So the next time someone tells a child to crawl back to the project he came from, remember that the child may have been listening to his father longer than you have been speaking. Remember that bedtime stories sometimes come back as subpoenas. And remember that mercy, from a 9-year-old, is the kind of grace nobody can teach. If this story sat with you today, a quiet like and a subscribe is how you sit with the next one. If a 9-year-old's careful sentences mattered to you, your subscribe is how we tell the next one, about a hospital janitor, a hedge fund founder, and a single post-it note nobody was supposed to find.